All right. Okay, hi, my name's Rosemary. I joined Red Hat a few months ago, and I'm going to be talking about my first project as a new OVN developer. Okay, so first we're going to talk about what is OVN, and then one of the first projects I did and what I learned from it, and then just some advice for other beginners. So OVN is a software-defined networking tool, which allows you to make virtual changes on top of a physical infrastructure. So one way that I've heard this explained that I like is if you have your networking infrastructure, in a data center set in stone, you don't want to go in every single day and move around all the cables. It's a lot easier to use a tool like OVN to be able to make virtual changes to your networking infrastructure. So these are some of OVN's components that are relevant to the project I'm going to talk about. So northbound database, NorthD, and the southbound database. So the northbound database is the one that the user interacts with. It's designed for that. And the NorthD daemon translates between the northbound and southbound database. And the reason this needs to happen is because the southbound database is designed for OVN controller to understand, which is what configures OVS. So yes, this is relevant. So yeah, now the project that I worked on, the steps to reproduce the issue were to create a logical router, create a logical router port on the router, and then add a static MAC binding for the logical router port, delete the router, and then wait for the northbound database changes to be propagated to the southbound database, which is what NorthD does, as we just discussed. So this is the topology, I guess. We just have a router, a port, and then a static MAC binding, which static MAC binding is not on the port. It's just an association between a port, an IP, and a MAC address. So you can have more than one MAC associated with a port. So up at the top, there's the code to, or the commands to do that. And then we have the logs, which this is the error that happened. Cannot delete data path binding row because of a remaining referential integrity violation. So the commit failed to the southbound database. And so we're gonna see why. So here we have the structure for these tables in the northbound database. So there we have here we have the router port, which is referenced by the logical router table. And then we have the static MAC binding, which does not reference anything else. As you can see, there's a dotted arrow, and that's just to show that it contains a string that contains the name of a port. So it's not an actual reference. So in the northbound, when we try to delete these two records, it's fine. And the static MAC binding is still there. And if you add back the router and the port, then the static MAC binding will be associated with them again. So that's fine. And that's what we want. And then the southbound has the same, has corresponding tables for the same stuff, but it's structured a bit differently. So as you can see, the logical router port table corresponds to the port binding table, and the port binding table references the data path binding table, which is the logical router table. But the big difference is that in the southbound database, the static MAC binding table references the data path binding table. So you might be able to guess where a problem will occur when in the southbound database, when NorthD is translating what is in the northbound database. When we try to delete these two records, there's a problem because the static MAC binding table has a reference to data path binding, and you can't delete a record that another record references. So the solution here is to delete the static MAC binding table along with the other two, all during the same transaction, which is okay because if you add back the router and the port again, it'll repropagate to the southbound database and add the static MAC binding again. So there's no problem there. And of course, a test was written to ensure that it works in the future. So this is the updated behavior. We have the 3 records in the southbound database. Delete all of them, and it works fine. So I guess what I learned from this is a better understanding of the differences between the function of OVN's databases and daemons, because I don't know, I've seen that picture so many times of the different OVN components, but didn't fully understand what they did. And insight into how the database components translate to code, because it can be a bit unintuitive. And beginner advice would be sign up to the mailing list. It might seem a bit daunting at first to participate on it, because it's like you're pressing a button and sending an email to hundreds of people, but it's pretty chill. It's not super formal. You don't have to be like professional. Take advantage of the docs. These OVN contributing docs are really good if you're contributing for the first time. It goes over pretty much everything. Use check patch on your patches before submitting them. It'll catch stuff that, but if you don't and it and the bot tells you messed up, it's fine. Like no one's gonna get mad at you. Make sure to ask questions. People are really generous with helping beginners. They want to encourage that. So, yeah. And that's it. Any questions? What? Oh.
Thanks for the talk. I actually do have a question. These talks are kind of, you don't get them often in kind of projects that have been going for a while, where everyone in the room has been contributing to the mailing list for a long time and we take it for granted. What would you want to change about kind of the onboarding process, or what did you find really difficult? And yeah, how would you change it?
I mean, I guess personally, I feel like I got pretty lucky because I had support there. Like I had people there who were willing to help me and guide me. But I could imagine being someone without that, who's just contributing on your own or at a company where you're like one of the only OVN people. It could be more difficult. So, I mean, I honestly think the docs could probably use an update. There's some things that, I mean, I went through them when I joined and I have been looking through them, and there's some pieces missing. I mean, I could even help do that. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
You had a line there about adding a test for every patch. I think that's great. What do you think about the documentation about our testing infrastructure?
That's a great question. The documentation, well, I don't think there's very much.
Okay, let me rephrase. How do you think we can help new contributors write tests? Because I remember back when I wrote my first test, it took a long time.
Yeah, that's a good question, because it seems like most people, what they do is copy another test and then, fix it to suit what they need it for. So, I mean, there's no like I think in the contributing docs, when I've read them, it says like just write a test, and like that's all it says. So it'd probably be helpful to in there like explain some basics of the macros, like what they actually do, and maybe like include some examples of simple tests, and how you could bend it to match your needs, I guess. I don't know.
Okay, that's a nice suggestion. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Let's thank our speaker.